Welcome to this first NSEAD panel discussion. Our focus for tonight being anti-racist art education, conversations and actions. So before I share a little bit more about the aims of this conversation, I'd like to first just go through some of our webinar housekeeping. If you're not, if you haven't already done so, please could you say hello in the chat, add in your name and perhaps where you work and maybe where you are zooming from. That would be really helpful. The chat will close in a couple of minutes and will reopen later this evening. So if you don't have a chance now, you can please write your details in a bit later. That would be lovely. Thank you. So please feel free to ask questions for the panel please accept our apologies if we don't have time to answer everyone's questions. But I will begin with a few questions for Paul Dash, and then we'll move into our panel discussions chaired by Paul. This will be followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Sophie Leach will be sharing your questions for the panelists. As they come in, she'll collate and share those with the panelists. And finally, this evening, we will conclude with Paul reading from the second edition of 4-Day Mourning. And this is a book that Paul will be republishing. And he'll explain a little bit more later in the evening. So we'll be now closing the chat and we'll be reopening after Paul's reading. So I think that have we closed the chat now?
Yes, that's closed now.
Yeah. Thank you. So why are we all here this evening? Why am I here? And why is this discussion of critical importance? So before we explore these questions, in my role as Vice President of NSEAD, I do welcome our esteemed colleague, friend, and chair for this evening discussion, Paul Dash. Paul is currently showing at Tate Britain's landmark exhibition, Life Between Islands. And to accompany this deeply engaging exhibition, he has updated and published the second edition of his remarkable autobiography, 4-Day Mourning, where he paints a detailed picture of his life as a child and that of a young adult and artist, drawing on the impact of two distinct but interrelated cultural experiences. We look forward to hearing more on this later. But for now, let's take a few steps back to gain an insight into the formation of our NSEAD Anti-Racist Art Education Action Group, some of whom are participating in this evening, and who will no doubt reference our anti-racist art education checklists. We are aware that many of you will have seen them, and we are delighted that they are already in use, serving to support the process of reflection, reviewing of current practice, for curriculum design, for resourcing, and for public publications. As was the case with many organisations, the Anti-Racist Art Education Group, many of whom are attending tonight, was formed in the shadow of the killing of George Floyd. Members of the group, aware of the implications of inaction at this time wanted to send a strong message that all art educators need to be responsible for reflecting on their practice, past, present, and future. And this very much in relation to the current educational landscape as we have it. And in their words, to not do so may mean that we are complicit in the continuance of racist messages by default. NSEAD is a learned society. We have a duty to educate ourselves, keep learning, and be part of real change. This requires us to share our stories, for deep listening, and honest dialogue. In response to events in 2020, NSEAD shared a collective call to action, setting out a 5-day, 5-week, 5-month, and 5-year plan. We must deliver on our priorities. We must deliver on our priorities to address inequality, diversity, and inclusion throughout our organisation and beyond. I speak this evening as an advisor to NSEAD Anti-Racist Art Education Group and their work on the checklists. I speak with lived voice and personal experience. I'm delighted to open this evening, the first of several ongoing conversations. So I'd like to begin now with a couple of questions that I prepared for Paul. Is that okay, Paul?
Oh, if I can answer the question, yes.
So, Paul, can you perhaps tell us how you're feeling about tonight's event, given its significance? Given its significance,
I think it's wonderful, and I've gone through the checklist, and I find it very complete, very well written, and thoughtfully developed piece of work. I think it's excellent. And being involved in this, bearing in mind that I haven't been in education since 2011, it's 10 years now. It's quite a momentous occasion for me, and I feel deeply honoured that you should actually ask me to be involved, because there's so many other people out there who have at least as much to offer as I do. So, you know, I say thank you all for that. And I've been in touch with some wonderful people here already. I shan't name names because I'll forget somebody, you know. But you know who I'm thinking of, the people I've been speaking to recently. And I know that people in the background whom I haven't been speaking to, who may have suggested my name. But I am thrilled and honoured. And I say thank you very much, and I'm looking forward very much to what people have to say this evening.
Oh, thank you very much, Paul. We're deeply honoured to have you here. It's hugely important that you are part of this conversation, Paul, and that you have agreed to chair it. You know, I'm aware that for many years you have researched and written about, and in particular, African Caribbean pupils in art education. What was your experience of conducting this research, Paul?
Well, I'll tell you about what led to the research in the first place, and that was my experience as a black kid at school. When I was at school in Oxford, I was the only black child of secondary school age in the whole city. If you go to Oxford now, it looks very different. But at that time, 1957, my brother and I, actually, my brother is 9 months older, sorry, he's 3 years older than me. He had 9 months to go at school to the age of 15, and then he had to leave. Which he did with great pleasure, because it's a terrible school. But so he left after 9 months, and then I was on my own entirely, the only black child, not only in that school, but as far as we knew, in the whole of Oxford. And we would have known most of the black people in Oxford at that time, because we stuck out, you know, we were there, and most of them would have been, virtually all of them would have been Caribbean people. And most of them came to our home because, you know, my father bought a house. I think he's the first black person probably to buy a house in Oxford. And people came there and he cut hair. So the men came to our home to have their hair cut. So we would have heard about other children, and there weren't any. We never saw any. They just didn't exist. So I was a bit of a pioneer. I didn't intend to be, but that's the way it was. And at school, I had a terrible time of it because I had to survive a lot of racism, particularly on the part of a couple of teachers, including the head teacher. And I didn't see material by black artists. They weren't mentioned. Artists weren't mentioned anyway at my school, but certainly there weren't any references made to black artists or black people. And when I went on to art college, Oxford School of Art, now Brookes University, had a wonderful teacher, Leonard McComb, but there weren't black people involved. There weren't black students. We weren't introduced to African art or anything like that. Of course, when I went to Chelsea, and the same applied there, and then I went into teaching, and I was appalled by the lack of material, resources at school, in the schools where I taught, that focus on black cultural development or black practices. Not that people were against that sort of thing, but the resources simply weren't there. And in those days, of course, there was the ELIA, in the London Education Authority organization, and they set up various resource banks in the City of London where people could go and borrow stuff, including East London, where I operated. And I borrowed a lot of stuff, but there's nothing at all about the Caribbean. And it's almost as if we didn't exist. And so I thought, there must be stuff out there. Let's see what we could find. So I went about doing the research.
Yeah, and I think that research, Paul, not only served us very well 10, 12 years ago, but certainly does still, is still a very important piece of research that we can draw upon, even as we attempt to address those very same issues that you've described, you know, through the lack of representation of artists and the lack of resources that reflect the lived experience of a lot of our young people in our schools today.
I should say that being involved in a Tate exhibition is an extraordinary experience. I mean, obviously it's the Tate, but apart from that, I'm surrounded by these people: Keith Piper, Sonia Boyce, you know, Hugh Locke, Ronald Moody, these are Aubrey Williams, fantastic people from my early period when I first met, you know, began to meet black artists, black people, and you know, and I I thought these were like gods to me, and especially Sonia Boyce. And here I am showing alongside them. I just cannot believe it. And so that is an incredible honor. But they have turned things on their heads in a way, in that they're really talking about being black in Britain, or being of Caribbean backgrounds. For the first time, you've got that voice out there. Whereas before the 1980s and the emergence of the Black Art movement in Wolverhampton with Sonia and Keith and various others, you know, it wasn't really happening in the same way. I was a lone voice out there almost. I mean, there was Aubrey Williams, you know, one or two, Frank Bowling and so on, but Ronald Moody, Althea McNeish. But we were like, you know, Errol Lloyd, but we had like fingers on the hand. Whereas with the 1980s, so it went boom. And of course, we got this, you know, sudden emergence of very talented, brilliant artists, black artists, or artists from the Caribbean, with so much to say about being in this country and how they felt about being in this country at different levels. But anyway, I'm alongside them now. I'm very privileged to be.
And rightly so, Paul, and rightly so. you know, I think that I've certainly made my own visit to the show already. One of many visits, Paul, that I certainly personally need to make, being very much on my own personal journey with all of this, but also the journey that we're taking as an organisation and as a community in terms of NSEAD, and my involvement as Vice President in that too, just to fully process so much of what this exhibition means for us right now. So, you know, thank you, Paul, for maintaining your passion and need to make art, and we're grateful because it gives us hope. So thank you.
I think art is so important. It represents a part of being human that cannot be located anywhere else. And I think if people out there in government really understood what art is about and art making in schools, then they just make it even more abundant. I mean, I think it is such an important subject, and art teachers are doing such an incredible job.
Yes, no, certainly. Yeah. Paul, can I just, we're going to move into our panel questions now. I think that what we will do is just ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So we can perhaps, start with Emily.
Thanks, Marlene. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
So I'm Emily Gopaul. I'm a primary art specialist, but been teaching in secondary and primary sector for nearly 20 years now. And I don't know, Marlene, if you wanted us to say a little bit about why we.
Yes, please. Yes, yeah. That's important.
The ARAEA group has been, it kind of spanned across a lot of the pandemic, you know, and it's been actually a really important resource for, I think, all of us as individuals, as well as the important work we've been doing in that group. But like Marlene said, after the killing of George Floyd in May, it felt that there was this huge rush to kind of fix racism. And what the group offered was a really important space for conversation, conversation that's still ongoing, that's really rich every time we meet, and a conversation that was in acknowledgement that this is not something that we can fix in 1 year, 1 month, one meeting. So these ongoing conversations have been really important to be part of, and you know, the amazing checklist has been a result of lots of really rich conversation, and conversation that we very often, you know, the meetings end in 10 times more questions, which is, I think, absolutely right, and as it should be. So I really, you know, I'm privileged to be a part of that group and part of the panel today.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Can we move now to Claire? Claire, if you could introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Claire.
How are you? Long time.
Nice I know. Nice to
hi.
see you again.
Nice to see you too. Hi, I'm Clare Stanhope. I'm the head of art here at Harris Girls College, and I also lead the Centre for Creative Explorations. And my route here, I suppose, to this point, as with all things creative, it's through multiple encounters over like several years that has fortuitously evolved into this opportunity to collaborate with the wonderful people that are part of the ARAEA group. And the common thread, I think, for me, that most of the experiences that led me here was that they required me to engage in a process of unlearning much of my personal and educational histories. So what started with questionings around like my own art education and where were the women artists and were there any women before Impressionism, led to various other questions. Who is valued in our curriculums, and as a teacher, who am I privileging within that, and can my students see themselves as integral to the curriculums that I've been developing over the years? So these like questions of who and what and why, a constant repeat over, you know, many years. And then obviously, like everybody's talked about, last year, everything kind of exploded. The amount of groups that came to the forefront after the killing of George Floyd, the conversation just became really rich and fertile. And you know, these questions, and for me, like as a white educator and educated through systems that I also started to want to trouble, that you realize that I'm implicit within those systems. So it's this really difficult process to try and disentangle yourself, like from yourself. So that, you know, it's like that, the struggle within that. So being part of the ARAEA group is like a way of trying to untangle this sort of very complicated and complex mess. And you know, that's like everything. It starts with questioning everything and acknowledging that you know, all the lots of stuff that was happening, it wasn't just about, you know, having a Black History Month here, or, you know, a diverse range of artists there. It's more complicated than that. And then for me, the ARAEA group has, like, and through the checklist and developing those and those conversations, it's sort of really helped develop this narrative around colonialism and racism that impacts and debilitates all of us. You know, how to do that, you know. And as for me, you know, it's, of course it's important that as a white educator we're an ally, but it's also more than that. You know, it's about us stepping up and realizing we're all part of these histories, and therefore that we're impacted by them, and it can only be together that we can really actively change them. So being part of the ARAEA group is part of that endeavour.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. And Dianne.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dianne Minnicucci. I teach art and photography at Thomas Tallis School. It's a very large, brilliant secondary school in South East London. I'm also the subject leader for photography. Hello, Paul. It's really nice to kind of virtually meet you. I think that I feel really fortunate to be part of a very progressive school where the arts are very enriching in our school. And, you know, these are very important conversations that we have to have about decolonisation and having an anti-racist art education. And for me, the ARAEA group has been a kind of fantastic meeting place to kind of unravel and start to, you know, reconstruct the curriculum for the arts. And I think that you know, the conversations have been very enriching, quite enlightening as well. And I think that, you know, it's been really great to have these conversations because we are unpicking everything. We're having these really honest, open discussions, and the checklists have been absolutely brilliant to kind of, you know, to start to deconstruct everything. And we are, you know, we are aware that we're only at the beginning now. So, you know, we've only just started, and it is a really long journey. These are very important conversations that we need to have. We are aware that the conversations can be quite difficult and they can be quite challenging. But, you know, these, you know, it's a very important subject matter. And when I started to do the research within our department, along with, you know, alongside lots of my colleagues, well, every colleague within our department, I felt immediately empowered. And, you know, I want to pass that on to the students. I want the students to see themselves in every experience in different art lessons. And I want them to have that same feeling of empowerment. I think it's crucial. You know, as Paul said, art makes people powerful. So art, all students should be, you know, should have that feeling of being really powerful. So, you know, it's, and as Marlene said, it's more than diversifying, just adding a few artists, but it's, and, you know, as Claire said as well, it's about unpicking the history and reconstructing. So, you know, that's why I've been very, you know, I feel very fortunate to be part of the group. It's brilliant. Thank you.
What are the lived experiences of global majority educators and children within a racist educational system?
Nice small question to start with, Paul. Yeah, so I think actually what are the lived experiences of our educators? I think even in the question, it kind of it raises some feelings for me that I've been having over the past few years of just a slight reticence to answer questions like that, almost on behalf of every global majority art educator, because really I can only ever speak to my own personal lived experience, and hopefully some of the time that will resonate with others. But I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of in these discussions, especially within education, within white spaces, is the conflation of global majority people into one group and one band. You know, for example, I am Indo-Guyanese, I'm London born, I'm a woman, and I can speak to my experiences as such. But in terms of my experience as an art educator, my personal lived experience, I've been reflecting on this and realised that in itself has changed. When I first started teaching, it was the early 2000s, and I grew up in North London in Haringey, but I actually went to school in Enfield, which is a suburb of London, and at the time was a very white suburb. So I had my own education in a very white school, you know, to echo what you were saying, Paul, not as extreme as your setting, but it was a very white school. And I went straight from there into my, you know, further education, to my teacher training degree. And I found myself teaching in a school in Hatfield, which again is just outside of London, and a very, very white school. And I was the only teacher of colour there. And in my honest kind of reflections about this, I realised that a lot of that time for me, and I think maybe a lot of people of colour will recognise this, a lot of that time was about assimilation, if I'm honest, because that's often what people of colour find themselves doing, is trying to assimilate the kind of the dominant culture in the spaces we find ourselves. And at the time I was in my early 20s, you know, so I was definitely not as you know, outspoken or confident as I am growing to be now. So that early lived experience was very much about assimilation. And, you know, we've spoken about, and we speak a lot about, decolonising curriculum. When I look back on my early lesson plans and my early curriculum design, I was very much leaning on that Western art history canon, because it's all I knew. It's all I'd been educated into, is that gang of white male artists. And I had myself, you know, and I've spoken before about the fact that I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I didn't question it. I didn't question where are the women when I was younger. I didn't question where are the brown people. And I think possibly I thought that there weren't any great artists of colour. But that changed, you know, I'm older now, the climate has changed. And so my lived experience has changed. And, you know, now I think it oscillates between an experience of, within these white spaces of schools that I still find myself in, wanting to be very outspoken, wanting to share different perspectives, feeling myself as an important voice in staff meetings, in curriculum design, in leading CPD events. But also, as we've spoken about in the ARAEA group, sometimes not wanting to do that. Sometimes the lived experience of being a brown female or a black female or a person of colour is not wanting to take on that responsibility. And certainly last year, when I was being asked to do a lot of speaking and thinking around issues of race and ethnicity, I got exhausted. And that was a really hard place to be, because as well as feeling exhausted, you feel a huge sense of responsibility to be the spokesperson for people of colour. So I think the lived experience, like everything, is ever changing, and we grow, we change. The climate definitely has changed, and hopefully is getting more, you know, ripe and fertile for these conversations. But that's, you know, and along that journey, we have sprinklings of kind of, you know, microaggressions, from microaggressions up to kind of overt racism as a teacher, you know, along the way. You know, things like we've spoken about, being mistaken for the other brown teacher, or, you know, all sorts of kind of experiences, which I'm sure you will all echo in your own way.
Very much indeed, Emily. Very interesting response to that question, I must say. And the second person now that we would like to respond to that question, which I'll repeat if necessary, is Dianne Minnicucci.
Hi, perfect pronunciation. Thank you, Paul. I had a very similar experience to you, Paul, because I grew up in the northeast of England. And in my school, I think there was, when I was in secondary school, there was only 3 Black children, and that was myself and my brother and my sister. And, you know, we, you know, similar to what Emily said, we, you know, we learn what we're taught, don't we? So, you know, we don't know any different really. And, you know, as you said, the climate's changed. If it was now, you know, having the benefit of hindsight, I would have said, you know, where are the different artists? You know, this doesn't reflect me, but we just accept what, you know, what we were taught at that time. And yeah, you know, I suffered lots and lots of racism from teachers, you know, obviously from other students. And I'm just thinking now, if I'd had kind of, you know, a different experience in having, you know, being shown different artists, it would have been a different experience, because I would have felt, you know, confident and knowing that there were other people like me. But, you know, we didn't have any of that. We weren't taught any of that. It was just, I felt very kind of left out, and I felt, you know, this is what I had. And, you know, it wasn't really exciting or engaging. And I didn't really, you know, even though I loved art as a student, as a secondary school student, I don't think I did as well as I could have done, because I wasn't excited by what I was being shown. And I specifically remember there was, you know, we had an older family friend that was at St. Martin's, and he was studying fashion. So I got my excitement from him. You know, he was, you know, his family was obviously Jamaican, West Indian, and he had all of this color and he had this design. And he was saying to me, as my family was saying to me on the other side, this is what you can achieve, you know. And I remember going back to into the class and saying, yeah, I want to go to St. Martin's, and, you know, I want to study fine art there, and I want to study fashion. The teacher said, don't be silly. None of you, speaking to the whole class, the class as a whole, none of you should apply to any of the colleges in London, because you won't get in. And I just thought, oh, she's so silly, because I had my parents at home and the family friends saying, you know, you can achieve anything as long as you kind of put your mind to it. So that was my personal education. But I you know, that was my experience. But I'm aware that not everybody has, you know, people to kind of push them. And I think that's another reason why I want to be that kind of teacher, to say to students, not only, you know, because of their color, but I also want to, you know, as I said, in our school, we're quite, you know, we have a really rich, exciting curriculum, and it's full of contemporary artists. And I know that, you know, my colleagues and I are engaged in, you know, researching. We share our experiences of seeing exhibitions, and, you know, I've shared with everybody the you know, the current exhibition at the Tate that's coming up. So, you know, lots of us have booked into that. And it's that kind of sharing which I didn't have when I was younger. And I think because I missed out, I just want to make sure that our students have that rich, varied curriculum, and they have that, you know, very enriching and empowering experience as well. So, you know, I think it's crucial. It's crucial to their experience, not only in art education, but in education of life, being included and having, you know, feeling valued, and having that, you know, having a right to be there. So I think it's crucial, it's vital.
Thanks very much indeed, Dianne.
Thank you.
It's stimulating hearing people speak with such, you know, knowledge of the difficulties, and yet, you know, offering hope for improvement for everyone. It's wonderful. How can I approach the difficult conversations needed to challenge racism in our subject?
Okay, thank you. First thing I think to acknowledge is that what the conversation is, what it looks like, how it is started will be different for all of us, dependent on our context, backgrounds, experiences, and there's no one way to do this. It might be using the ARAEA checklist. It might be through sharing experiences, resources, films, books, that are things that are already in your context. But what it will hopefully do, it's to begin an adventure that's really going to enrich whatever place it is that you're situated within. For me, that meant various conversations happened simultaneously, but probably the most important conversation, and in some ways the most difficult conversation, was the one that I had with myself. And it's a conversation that I haven't yet finished and suspect that I never will. And engaging truthfully with like aspects of my education and things I spoke about before, and my unconscious bias, like literally taking a test, was really fascinating, as I could viscerally feel how taught race, gendered, religious, ableist stereotypes really play into our split-second decision making, and realizing that our unconscious biases are this, they are taught and sedimented in history and society through hundreds of years of colonial narratives, then you can take ownership of them, because anything that is learned can then be unlearned. Although this isn't always easy, and it's a continuous process, and it's a struggle, it's also really empowering. So this process like helped me then discussing with others, and those conversations are often quite uncomfortable and difficult, but to be able to move those difficult conversations from the personal into a space between, a socially constructed space that really needs to be unpicked, can help to sort of find a route through. It can be a starting point, and a simple way is just to look at what's already there, like what you've already got. So for example, we started with an audit on our schemes of learning, so in an educational context, and just looking at the percentages of who's in it, how many men, how many women, which global communities are included or not. And at the time when I had started teaching and writing all my schemes of learning, I could have happily given a talk about how amazing they all were. But it's only really when you start to unpick it and actually boil it down to those like hardcore percentages that you can see the gaps and actually realize what you do miss and how your unconscious biases play throughout that, but also how our education plays throughout that. You know, what we've spoken about, that what you're taught, when you're taught through an education system that does leave a lot of people out of it, then you end up repeating those narratives. So, you know, once you start questioning, you just get more questions. So it triggers a process, you know, but LGBTQ plus, you know, disabled artists, who else is missing within the context? Like, so it evolves, it's ever evolving, and importantly, I think it's, you know, our identities are emergent. You know, things are very different now than they were when I was growing up, and especially when you look at different communities. So it is a conversation that can't ever end, because it is always, it's always renewing itself. It's always becoming something different. And yes, checklists are really helpful, but having any conversation in whatever format is only ever empowering if they then draw all the communities together. And curriculum and art education is such a brilliant way to do that, because it does do that. That's integral to it. So, you know, once we have that way in to actively change something, other conversations then may not be as hard to instigate, if the process has already started.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. You know, obviously we are restricted on time, so we have to move on to Emily again. But thank you very much indeed for that. Very enlightening. Emily, same question. Emily Gopaul, would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Paul.
Would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's fine. I got it. Yeah, so just to, I guess, to echo a lot of what Claire said around curriculum being a good lens through which we can instigate these conversations within educational settings. I know from my own experience working with schools that just a quick glance across a primary school art curriculum will very quickly show you, you know, like we touched on before, that's very well trodden gang of male white artists. So that's a really good starting place for looking for conversations around decolonising curriculum and anti-racist conversations. I think also, you know, again, like Claire touched on, this thing of uncomfortable conversation. And I know pre-killing of George Floyd, we were much less good at it, and we're still not great at it as human beings, at feeling uncomfortable. You know, there's a real icky, horrible quality to a lot of the conversations and a lot of the self-reflections that have to go on. And as human beings, we are not very good at that, but it's something that we have to kind of we have to go through in order to progress through and yeah, unpack and unpick what the current state of affairs is. But importantly, I will just say on this, I know we need to speed through this question, but really importantly, which links to the previous question around lived experiences, I think it's really important to say that as a person of colour, that you must never feel that the weight is on you to instigate these conversations. You know, we've touched on being a person of colour in white spaces, and I think there's often that tendency to feel like you hold that baton, and if you're not seizing every opportunity to challenge and share perspectives, then you're failing. And I think it's really important that we don't bear that weight as individuals, and that you have networks. You know, I know within the ARAEA group, we are developing a safe spaces network for sharing these kind of lived experiences. And yeah, you know, sharing the exhaustion, the fatigue that can come with being looked to be a kind of black explainer or brown explainer. And I think it's really important that you have resources, that you have family members or friends or networks that you can go to for support in having or not having those conversations in your place of work. Because you will miss opportunities. You know, there will be those microaggressions that happen, and you'll go home at night and think, oh gosh, I didn't challenge that, or I didn't respond to that in the right way. And it's really important that you have people you can go to lean on and talk about that.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Very good indeed. Thank you very much. How can I start the process of decolonising the art curriculum? And what might an anti-racist curriculum look like? And the first person I would like to respond to that is Marlene.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I think this is, you know, the question of how do I start is really, you know, where we're at really in terms of, you know, what do I use, what do I do to begin this process? Well, I would say that we need to think and reflect and review what is it that we currently have in terms of our curriculum. You know, who is it that has written the curriculum? You know, who do we have represented within our curriculum? Using the ARAEA checklists as a means by which we can, and it doesn't have to be a linear process of working through the checklists. It's very much a case of deciding where it is that you feel you do need to start, and probing and investigating and building your knowledge. I think there is, I know certainly for me, I've got a ferocious appetite at the moment for wanting to learn about the things that I didn't learn, that wasn't presented to me through my educational experience. And so looking at where there are gaps in what it is that we're presenting to the students. Certainly, I think, Paul, we're talking about 10 years ago that I was first introduced to the autograph APB resource, a really rich resource full of photographic images, black and brown people that I'd never seen in quite that way before, presented in a way that a high quality, well-produced resource, and using that as a way of thinking about, okay, so what is it that I need to do with this resource to ensure that my curriculum is diverse, does represent the students that I have in front of me. Do they see themselves reflected in what it is that I'm presenting to them? There are many more resources now that are being developed, certainly as a result of the awakening that we currently have. I know that Dianne Minnicucci, for instance, is the person behind the amazing Black artists resource that is online through Instagram that we can now access. So it's really taking time to build our knowledge, look at where we've got gaps in our own knowledge, asking questions of ourselves, but also of those people that hold that knowledge. And then once we've asked those questions, really to enter into some deep listening, to again really learn and understand who has written, you know, where are we at in terms of our current educational landscape? Who's put that landscape together, and what is it that we need to do in order to ensure that everybody that we have in front of us in terms of our classroom and that we're interacting with are represented.
Thanks very much, Marlene. That's very good, as always. Can we move on again to Dianne, please? Same question.
Again, thank you. I think it's, you know, it starts with having those deep conversations. It starts by, you know, as Marlene said, reviewing and reflecting on what you already have. But, you know, it's research. There's a variety of different ways to research. And I think it is, you know, when we, you know, one of the things that we came up with, it's a quite, you know, it's already been touched upon when we talk about, you know, what is in our, you know, what is included in our schemes of work, what are we teaching? What have we been teaching for many years? What has worked? What has worked? What has not worked? How does this reflect the students? And, you know, we've had this conversation about teachers using other cultures and maybe not really understanding what is going on. So, you know, the typical, sorry to say, if you have this, but, you know, the African masks. What are we learning from African masks? And, you know, when we say Africa, Africa is kind of this, it's such a huge continent. So, you know, if you can't kind of generalize, so it's kind of generalizing. And again, you know, there's so many different resources because, you know, we've used autograph when I was a student. You know, I was studying and, you know, I went to St. Martin's and they were, you know, they first introduced me to autograph, and they also introduced me to Steve McQueen, that is a brilliant filmmaker. So, you know, we were able to go there to do research. So that's when, you know, the research really opened up for me. And I think now I've started to dip into that research again. You know, I've started the resource Marlene mentioned, the amazing Black artists on Instagram, and I'm constantly, you know, engaging. And I think that is, you know, we have to do the research, but we have to invest as well. And our school was able to invest in terms of having the anti-racist art teachers come in, and well, they didn't come in. We had like an online session with them. And before, after, and during that period, I was able to, I feel like in our school, I'm kind of given space to have those discussions, to have those difficult conversations, to have those difficult, you know, meetings where we just have to open up and we have to review and we have to say, this is not working and this is not working because. And I think it's just being honest and doing the research. I think, you know, I would say it again, research is so important. And there's, you know, 1,000 ways to do it. looking at my page is a good thing, but also Innova, people like Autograph, and there's so many different organizations as well that can help. You know, they've got fabulous, absolutely brilliant resources, Autograph and Innova, places like that. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed, Dianne.
Thank you.
Excellent. You know, I'm learning so much this evening. Autograph is a fantastic organization, isn't it? And, of course, David A. Bailey, who's curated the exhibition at the Tate, is very, very involved with that. And Emily, if you can make a statement on this, please.
Yeah, just very quickly to add, because I know I kind of speak on behalf of the primary sector, and I guess, yeah, just to highlight that in the primary sector, you know, often what you have is non-art specialists leading and designing art curricula. And they're, in a way, more, perhaps more than in the secondary sector, what you have is a class teacher who's given the additional responsibility of designing a whole art curriculum. And so what they'll often do, understandably, because teachers are very, very busy, is look to places like galleries or pre-designed resources. And you know, what I try and encourage people to do is not necessarily rely on those for the exact same reasons, that those pre-designed resources very often lean back on that same canon. But even looking to places like, you know, Tate, National Gallery, we know now that they don't necessarily hold all the answers to what is art and what is culture. So I think a lot of what the primary sector can do is encourage students, rather than looking outwards for this thing of cultural enrichment or cultural capital, is encouraging students to engage with schemes of work and lessons that that encourage them to bring in their own cultural identity, celebrate their own identities, their own cultural heritage, so that they know that their cultural heritage is very valid and valued, and that they can be really strong in that before engaging with the status quo of what is culture and what is art. Because it's fine to engage with these things, but we can do so with a critical eye, and we can do so from a place that is one that is very grounded in our own pride, in our own cultural heritage. So I think, yeah, as well as curriculum reform, designing opportunities for students to celebrate their own nuanced cultural heritage is really important.
I think that's critical. I totally agree with you. And that means, of course, that in this period of intersectionalism, where we have people who are not necessarily black or brown, but who are also in the margins, they too can have a voice, if you allow them to have a voice, to speak. We have these conversations, what we were talking about earlier, between yourself and the children in the classroom. Then they begin to tell you about who they are. You're not imposing on them your will, but they're telling you, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I want to talk about. And I think that's where art education really has so much to offer, not just the children themselves, but the world. What aspirations exist for anti-racist art education? An interesting question. Clare Stanhope.
Okay, that's a massive question. So to aspire to an anti-racist art education system, I think first it needs the acknowledgement that colonial and patriarchal racist agendas dehumanizes all of us. So we need to be able to activate in multiple ways from various experiences, perspectives, backgrounds, and how this is it's a joint endeavor. That it's not a tick box linear exercise from A to B, but one that's emergent and ever evolving. And it's integral to see that as part of the future of our subject. Art was used to perpetuate colonial narratives, but it is also the subject that can help to challenge and reimagine them. And therein, I think, lies the hope. So whatever perspective, history, experience we come with, we already have the tools with which to do something, or to undo it or redo it. And then when we think about hope within like a neoliberal education setting, which is reliant on grades and certificates, there's like a real fragility to that. And it's very individualistic. But hope in terms of this question, or if you know the work of Bell Hooks, for her, you know, in her context, the way she writes about it, then it's all about possibility, and it's that which I find inspiring, as it's an orientation towards the future, and a future that we all have an active part in shaping. And of course, Paulo Freire, he talks about this idea of hope not being alone, like the thing that's going to change anything. But it, you know, and he sort of said in his book, it's like hope is not enough, but it's necessary, and you can't win just with it, but without it, then the struggle towards something is weak and unsubstantiated, and we need critical hope. And I think he said something like the way fish need water, or unpolluted water, I think he said. And it's, you know, that's inspiring. That's what art is. That's our, you know, hopefully where we find our, you know, our breath and our inspiration. And it's that hope that through these discussions, that we've been having with the ARAEA group, and, you know, that everybody has in their own settings and curriculums, you know, that's where the critical work is done. That's where we start to inspire and motivate and unlearn stuff that's come before, by orientating ourselves towards a different kind of future. And our education is so integral to that. You know, as Paul said, it's this, you know, you said it's our humanity, and so we have to use this as a tool to activate something better than where we have been. And it's got to be at the forefront of those conversations. And unfortunately, the government never seems to realise it. Years and years in, we're still fighting that particular case, but it is, you know, and with, you know, that's where this subject's so powerful, because it's embedded in collaboration. You know, we do these things together, and it's a collaboration that we hopefully are all engaged in.
Excellent. And thank you very much indeed for that, Claire. And Marlene, to wind up.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. And I wholeheartedly agree with so much of what Claire has already shared. And I mean, I would keep it really very, very, very simple in that, you know, certainly my personal aspiration, and I'm sure the aspiration of NSEAD, is that every child, regardless of their race, has access to high quality art education that reflects them and their lived experience, that they will see themselves reflected in the resources and the processes and the artists that are presented to them, so that you know, that we work very hard to remove the barriers that prevent that from happening. So certainly that's my own sort of personal aspiration and my hope. I think that we've come already. We have achieved so much in just this last you know, few months and year, over this last year, in realizing some of those aspirations. And it is just a start, and there is so much more to do. But I think that we have intent, we have a will. I think that we are very much together on this. I think that we are supporting one another in this process, recognizing that there is such a richness that can come from being actively anti-racist in terms of what we do and what we present in terms of art education.
Thank you very much indeed, Marlene. I think we can only be full and complete people when we have anti-racist art education, certainly in our subject area, because racism rots the individual racist. And not only does it affect the object of that racism, but it rots the inside of the individual racist. That's my view. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you ever so much for putting your questions into the panel. And I hope that those of you that I've answered just by typing, bear with us, please, and we will, I hope in the next 2 questions that we're going to merge a couple of that come in. So one for Di, please. Could you just go over again what the ARAEA checklists are, and does it have a progression map with diverse artists included? And it's a question to you in part because of the work you've been doing on your website.
No, the checklists don't have, so the checklists are a kind of, how can I say, a kind of series of kind of pointers that you can include when you are either designing schemes of work, or, you know, there's one that leads to kind of what kind of language do we use, for example, you know, when we're talking about a diverse group of artists. You know, I gave an example earlier about, you know, we don't say African artists. Africa is a, you know, it's a large continent, so we have to make sure that we're doing research to pinpoint exactly what we, you know, what we want to teach, what we want to show, what is it about that particular culture that we're talking about. So, you know, one of them is talking about language. So it's just kind of unpicking things that we might have used or that we might have said before, and just kind of, in, you know, kind of very gently directing people to the you know, to the correct language to use. That's just kind of one of them. The when we're talking about a diverse range of artists, you know, decolonizing is kind of like a lot more than that. It's about being able to you know, move away from the traditional canon of white European male artists, and it's offering a very rich curriculum. Now, you know, this is about each teacher or each faculty doing their own research, even, you know, they're getting together and finding out what, you know, which artists that they want to use. You know, there's so much information out there. And it's not about providing a resource for people, you know, it's about providing kind of pointers, kind of like the backbone, but every one of us has to do our own research. And believe me, when, you know, everyone in our faculty is, you know, visiting exhibitions, reading books, reading articles, passing them on to each other. You know, we've got 3 different Instagram, Talis Arts, Talis Photography, and then, you know, the amazing Black artist, and we're sharing everything there. But each of us is engaging and investing in research, and I think that is the most important thing. No one has given us the information. We've had to do that research, but the research is brilliant, and the research is really important. It's vital. And, you know, it's there. There's so many different places where you can, you know, where you can research the work of different artists. And I think, you know, we all have to invest in a little bit of time to do that research. You know, it's yeah, it's just crucial. We have to do it. You know, I listened to a talk. There's a brilliant book called Decolonizing Photography by Mark Seeley, who's the founder of, not the founder, the director of Autograph. And I was listening to a talk with him and 2 American artists and Vanley Burke, a British photographer. And he was saying, you know, I asked a question, you know, what do we as educators do? I already knew the answer, but he just said research. That's what you've got to do. It's research. And, you know, the checklists are an important resource to help you as you do the research, just to make sure that you are saying the right thing, using the right language. And yeah, it will just, yeah, it's a very vital resource, useful resource for you know, to work with alongside the research. But that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Dianne. That was a question from Ishara Pereira. So thank you very much for that question. I'm going to merge 3 questions that have come in and ask the panel, and that's from Liz and Graham, and Graham's also written a few more. So I'm sorry that we can't get through all of them, but if I merge these together and ask the panel to say one action that they would do in order to diversify the curriculum. And if I could ask Marlene to begin.
You know, I think that certainly I would talk to the students. So I think that we are, you know, it's a it's a two-way process, isn't it, really? To start with, well, you know, what are the students interested in? You know, often it is a case that students, you know, well, we don't know what we don't know, but there's also something around students sometimes hold information and knowledge that we don't have, and certainly I would say that's one way.
Thank you, Marlene. And Emily?
Yeah, I guess to sort of build on what Marlene said and something that I mentioned earlier, which is around building in lessons which are, you know, rather than using artists in the way that they sometimes are used in the classroom, which is that you look at an artist and you kind of emulate their work. Perhaps using, and a lot of contemporary artists are really good for this, looking at the themes and the way that they work with their own cultural identity. And I know, Paul, you do similar, but artists like Njideka Akinwumi-Crosby, Chila Kamari-Berman, these artists who use their own mixed cultural heritage in their work. So we are then modelling how real life artists draw on their own personal experience as a really valued and valid way to produce artwork. But also, just to add to that quickly, there are some really practical tips, and one of the things I often get teachers to do is to start including in their planning documents, including thumbnails of the artists, because that's a really instant visual way of just kind of start seeing, you know, and it just holds us all accountable.
Thank you, Emily. And Claire?
I was thinking about what I think's been the most interesting one that I've done, and I think again it's going to go back to the students and this question of who are our artists. And I think the best way that, or the most inspiring way that I've come across is recognizing that actually we don't have to look outside of the school context for our artists. They're sitting right in front of us, and having some of the incredible work that they have done, and then using that back into our schemes of learning and our curriculum, so that they, you know, that's cultural capital and all of that, that they can see that they are feeding into this rich resource themselves. So the other students that then come up after them, they know that that's an artist that was sitting in their seat, and it's come from our context within our school in this particular area. So that's I love that one, seeing them in the curriculum, seeing students.
Thank you, Claire. And we've been asked, could you say the book again that you mentioned for one of the people that have asked the question? It's a photography book.
Decolonising the Camera by Mark Seeley.
Thank you. And if you can very quickly sum up, what one action would you take to decolonise the curriculum?
One action, first of all, collaborate. You know, it can't be just one or two teachers changing the curriculum. So collaborating, so I will say it's very difficult to sum it up in one word, but collaborate with the team and all of us kind of discussing, reflecting, and doing the research together, and yeah, working collaboratively. And I think, you know, it is, you know, somebody said having those conversations and listening as well. So it's being able to, you know, I feel very fortunate at our school that I can talk and people would listen. And I think it's, yeah, just having that conversation with each other and just making sure that it is a kind of two-way conversation, and then kind of planning together collaboratively, listening and talking to each other and doing the research together. It's very important. Yeah.
Paul, thank you for such deft and generous chairing of the discussion of the panel. You really
wonderful people. I'm in awe of them. I really am.
Well, you gave such generous steer and really incisive questions, and it allowed the panel to really reflect and bring their considerable expertise,
yes,
and experience and lived voice. So we thank you so much. I thank you all. Thank you, Paul, Marlene, Emily, Dianne and Claire for this evening. Of course, the ARAEA group for this work that goes on, and to the NSEAD members and people here tonight who are really sort of committed to doing the work that's required. it's been a milestone tonight, actually, I think, along the way. We're in the morning of the work for sure, but it's been a real inspiration. So thank you, everybody. And have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for what you've done.